I'm going to introduce you to Wayne Scott, he's the PR for the Jaguar Enthusiasts Club, and Rob Jenner, the former chairman and his personal friend. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Wayne and for Rob. Chaps, this one's Wayne, he's the big tall one, and this one's Rob, it's the little short one. A little bit like Norman, because Norman was like that big, wasn't he? He was 5'2" as a jockey, Norman, and he's Norman was one of those people that, it's a little bit like if I've ever interviewed Sterling as well. He's one of those people that, he's like a little watch. It's like you wind him up, you just ask him a question about D-type or something in his past. You say, so Norman, what was it like at 160 miles an hour in a D-type? Go! And he would then go, right, I can tell you, it was going down the road, and he would just regale every single inch of the journey, and you would sit there and be flabbergasted by that guy's motoring knowledge and what he knew and what he understood. Norman was given an OBE by the royal family, by the Queen. He'd come from an era when racing and test drivers were all like heroes. You know, these are the guys, no seat belts, you know, no seat belts, leather helmets. When boundaries of technology and engineering were pushed aside and broken through, all while swearing, he used to wear a shirt and tie when he drove his car. He was a gentleman racer. We lost him earlier this year. Guess what? The guy was 99 years of age. If anyone had a good innings, it was Norman. But rather sadly, he didn't get his telegram from the Queen. And he wanted to do something really special on his birthday, which we'll talk about towards the end of this. And maybe we'll raise the roof in this building and hope we can make it happen for him. Chief Test Driver and Development Engineer for Jaguar between 1952 and 1985. Between 52 and 85. I mean, that guy earned his pension pot. What does the fact that Jaguar Land Rover, even in modern times, why do they pay such a tribute to Norman, and what do they say about him?
Well, I think Norman, as you rightly said, had 33 years working at Jaguar, and he was one of these guys that went to work and did his job. But in later years, he became this brand ambassador, and he travelled the world, flying the Jaguar flag, and as you say, Mike, telling the stories. That was what was important to Norman. And he had that total recall of journeys that he did, cars that he tested, and he could tell you all of these stories in absolute depth and minute detail. And in later years I got to know him very, very well, and just listening was just mind-blowing to what this man did. And I think Jaguar hold him in that regard because of what he did. I mean, he travelled millions of miles as a Jaguar ambassador in later life.
Yeah, fortunately with Norman, somebody in later years, I've done it with my company, whenever I got to interview him, you press record and you've captured it. You've captured, you know, his voice is still there, it's still out there today, and there's not only me, there's been thousands of people wanting to interview Norman in a time when we've got digital technology. So fortunately we've caught Norman's stories, and some of them are still out there to be regaled. Again, to you, Rob, a list of cars that Norman developed for Jaguar include pretty much every great car that Jaguar's ever produced, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, literally every great car they've ever produced. So how far back does it go?
Well, he goes back to C-Type in 1951 and right through to XJ40 in the 80s. And name any Jaguar in that era, and you've got the list there, and we all know the list.
He developed them.
Norman was there. He had something to do with every single one of those cars, and again, as I say, could tell you about it in minute detail.
And the technology, of course, that went with them, because the work that he did on the C-Type was around developing disc brakes, which are on every car now. We take them for granted, but it was Norman taking that technology and pushing it to the limit that gave us disc brakes that we take for granted now.
It's amazing, absolutely amazing. So Wayne, why is it important for the Jaguar Enthusiasts Club to honour Norman with a special display? What did he mean to Jag fans? And I'm one of those fans, you know, but what did he mean to us?
He was a hero, first of all. He was able to give Jaguar fans an insight through his amazing stories and tales into what it was like working at Jaguar when those iconic cars were in development, were launched and were being built. And also, he was just a great guy. He was friendly with everyone when he came on the club stand here at the NEC, which he did frequently. He would engage with members and chat to them and tell them his stories, and everyone was Norman's friend, you know. And so as a club member, you turn up and you see someone like that on your club stand, well, it's amazing. The fact that he wants to talk to you is even better.
It's fantastic, isn't it? On the Jaguar on the Jaguar Enthusiasts Club stand, there are two iconic 50s cars from Jaguar, the C and the D type. How did Norman contribute to the success of both of those cars?
So the Jaguar C-Type was one of his first projects, and I mentioned he was developing the disc brakes, and in 1952 he passengered with Sterling Moss on the Mille Miglia to go and test these disc brakes that he'd been working on. They were third until Sterling Moss crashed into a rock and about 100 miles from the end. So it was really, by the time the C-Type had turned up at Le Mans and had won those famous victories with the likes of Rolt and Hamilton at the wheel, what gave that car the edge at Le Mans was its braking and was the fact that it had such straight line speed. That development was then taken through by Norman into the Jaguar D-Type, that of course followed in the late 1950s. And what he gave to that car was an ability to get the ultimate speed out of it and work with those really big famous drivers, the likes of Mike Hawthorne, to develop those cars around what those drivers needed and around what Le Mans required for them to win. And of course they were all road cars as well, so Norman was so in tune with those cars. The reason why Jaguar really entrusted him was because he was known not only for his technical ability to drive a car and know exactly what wasn't quite right with it, but he was also, as a test driver, very delicate with them. So when you're developing a prototype as important as the D-Type, you need someone who's going to look after that investment of the company.
Very good. It's bloody brilliant, isn't it? What the guy did. I mean, seeing the D-Type, like, you know, if you're a classic car fan, they have to be up there in the top 5 best ever cars in the world. And to think that this little 5'2" Yoda, you know, helped develop him, it's just been incredible. His knowledge must have been invaluable to people like you, because he's passing that knowledge down, isn't he? Absolutely.
The stuff that we've learned from Norman, just sitting, you know, down over a drink or a coffee, and the stories that he tells, if you hear them, you think, no, that didn't happen, it's so far-fetched, and then you know, but you know that it's real, and you just think, wow.
And there is one of those stories that I'm going to get Wayne to summarise for us very quickly, because when I sat Norman down for an interview once, he was sat behind the wheel of a D-Type, and I sat him down for this interview, and I said, it must be crap what they say about you and the E-Type Jaguar and the launch. And he went, oh no, I'll tell you exactly how it happened. And then he just told me the story from the afternoon. You know, he said, well, I walked into his office and Mr. Lyons said, oh, and there is the story. So just tell him.
Well, it sums him up really, because effectively what happened was they'd gone to the Geneva Motor Show with the Jaguar E-Type. They knew it was going to go down well, of course they had confidence in it, but they didn't quite realise how much demand there would be from the press for test drives to try out this amazing car. Now Enzo Ferrari was about to say it was the most beautiful car in the world, so the hype was building. And Sir William Lyons didn't have enough cars basically to give to the press to go and try this car out. So on the phone to Coventry he gets, asked Norman to bring one over through the night, and he drove, remembering this is the early 1960s, from Coventry all the way through to Geneva in the E-Type that's on the Jaguar Enthusiasts Club stand through the night, delivered it in time for the 10 AM press launch, and then drove it back again, and then started at work the next day like nothing had happened.
Right, so why that story is incredible is this is the early 1960s. Britain didn't have any motorways. We didn't have any motorways. The M1, but he didn't touch it.
Or a channel tunnel.
Or a channel tunnel. So there was a boat crossing in there somewhere. So you imagine, he tells the story, it's like, it was really late, it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he gets the phone call, and it says, you've got to deliver the car, it's got to be there by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And he said, well, really? And they said, yeah, just pack an overnight bag, get in the car, and go for it. So he gets in the car in Coventry. You can imagine back then, you know, you've got, I can't even say Hillman Mintzes and Commer vans and that kind of thing in your way, you know, these old Bedford trucks in your way on A roads and B roads, and somehow you have to get that car down to Dover, across on a ferry, and then all the way through France into Switzerland.
And you can't bend it because it's got to be launched to the press in the morning.
It's got to be launched at the most important motor show in the world and put in the eyes of the world's press. So it's got to get there in enough time to clean it as well.
But the story is, he got to Dover and the ferry was full. And Norman sweet-talked them and told the ferry staff that this is the new Jaguar and it's got to be launched, it does 150 mile an hour. and the guys go, right, we'll get you on, and they squeezed him on the boat.
It's fantastic, isn't it? Norman did say that he tried out the top speed of that car several times on that journey, which you would imagine little Norman behind the wheel, grinning, yeah, you know, smiling like a Cheshire cat.
Well, XJ13, and that's up on the Jaguar Enthusiasts Club stand. Go and have a look at it. It is the only one. It is probably the most valuable car in the world. So it was launched in '66 to go racing at Le Mans to beat the Ferraris and the Fords, and they changed the rules. So there's only one built, and it's put away in a shed at Rounds Lane and forgotten about a little bit, I suppose, as these things were. And in '71, when they launched the V12 engine, they dragged out XJ13 to do some promotional work at Myra. And Norman's pounding round, being filmed, and has the unfortunate mishap of a blowout. And I believe it to be about 160, 165 miles an hour. And it went onto the infield into the mud. If you've seen the pictures, it's screwed up into a ball. It reminds me of any of us ex-smokers when you took the silver paper out the top of a cigarette packet and screwed it up and threw it away. That's what the car looked like. And Norman knew what was happening and was not wearing seatbelts and managed to duck down into the passenger footwell. And if you go and have a look at XJ13 on the stand, you'll see how tiny that is. And this car essentially screwed itself up into a ball. Norman gets out. There is a picture of him standing next to 13 looking at it like this, and as you say, was at work the next day. Incredible. That's what he did.
Incredible. I mean, the guy was just, he was brilliant. I mean, to throw yourself into the footwell of a car when you're having a 165 mile an accident takes some thinking, doesn't it?
And I think it also says a lot about the man, because this wasn't a race, this was not in competition anywhere, this was a press day, this was a launch. They were filming the car because they were talking about the heritage of the E-Type and how they were launching the new V12 version. So it's not like he was racing against anyone, but when Norman got behind the wheel, he did his best and he drove that car as fast as it needed to go.